Welcome back to Lu et approuvé. Today, the video is in English because I'm going to talk about one of my translations. The translation of Presque toutes les femmes by Héléna Marienske into English with the title Almost All the Women and Me. Translating always means choosing between two temptations. The first is to smooth out the text until it reads as if it had been written directly in the target language. And a lot of translations get praised for that. The second is to let the foreignness of the source text show through, with turns of phrase, references, some words. Lots of translators have talked about this tightrope walking dilemma between these two temptations. I've used this metaphor of tightrope walking to describe translation for a long time. And I'd like to talk about 3 examples where I walked that tightrope in the translation of Presque toutes les femmes. I want to be honest about what my choices were and about what they might have cost in the end to the reader of the translation. Before I start talking about the translation itself, let me place this book in the context of what I usually cover on this channel, contemporary French women's writing. Presque toutes les femmes is an example of autofiction. Marienske, writing her own life, her family, the women around her, her bisexuality, without pretending that the boundary between author and narrator is solid. This is the same territory that Chloé Delaume works with, although the two writers do it in very different ways. You could say that Delaume constructs and Marienske excavates. Both of them refuse the idea that a life, once written, becomes simple. The fact that Presque toutes les femmes is an autofiction is part of why the translation problems in this episode weren't just technical puzzles, although I do love the technical puzzles. Leaving a quotation in French, having to split the meaning found in one French word into 2 French words, questioning my positionality as a translator, all 3 of these came back to the same question that autofiction always asks. Whose voice is this exactly, and how do I preserve it? When I let the foreignness show through, the advantage is that the English language reader stays aware that they're reading a translation, that the text comes from somewhere else. It carries a voice, a culture, and a history that isn't their own. Neutralizing it, on the other hand, produces a comfortable text, but it's one that often erases its origin. Of course, the drawback is accessibility. A word left in French, a reference left unexplained, these are doors that stay closed for the readers who don't have the keys. Every time I make such a choice, I have to decide whether the opacity is worth it, whether the example is something said that clarity would have made disappear. Let's just look at 3 examples. Quotes in French appear several times during the book, and sometimes I left them in French. This is a choice on my part, not a gap. This is a choice, not a gap. A translated quotation inside a translated text can disappear into the surrounding language. It can read as if it belongs to the same register and the same voice as everything around it. Leaving it in French does the opposite. It marks the passage as a citation, a piece of someone else's writing entering the text from the outside. For an English language reader, the foreignness is information. It tells you This is not Marienske's sentence. This is a quotation. You should treat it as such. Héléna Marienské, like many writers, is a lover of literature. She has an advanced degree and she was a teacher of French literature and language. So the literary references and quotes abound in her novel. In an earlier video, I talked about translating or finding alternative source similar quotes. In an earlier video, I talked about finding equivalent English language source quotes to incorporate into my translation because the original quotes carried specific meaning that was necessary for the reader to have to understand the passage in which they occur. I didn't always do that in Presque toutes les femmes. In at least one example, I left a relatively long quote, part of a monologue from Racine's Phèdre in French. I decided to do this because it carries no information that's necessary to the plot. It does, however, give information about the narrator's knowledge of literature. She's trying to prove that, in some cases, her typically Southern French pronunciation of generally silent E's also occurs in classic literature. It would have been ridiculous to have her try to make that point with a quote from English literature. There's a cost to this, though. A reader who doesn't understand French loses direct access to what's being cited, and it makes the reading experience very different for them as opposed to the reading experience for someone reading the source text, since the passage from Phèdre is often studied in high school in French and is quite well known. Nonetheless, I decided that this cost was worth paying because the alternative of folding the quotation into English would have erased the very distinction that the book is trying to make in the first place. The second puzzle, a single word, 4 letters, coco, C-O-C-O. In French, coco has a variety of meanings depending on context. It can be a term of endearment. It can informally refer to a communist, or it can be the root of the word cocorico, which is what French roosters say. And this points to French national pride, since the rooster is one of France's national symbols. Marienske uses the word both to highlight her belief in communist ideals and her time on television working as a coco girl. The difficulty here isn't that the word is ambiguous. The difficulty is that Héléna, the subject of the book, was literally both of these things at once. From 1985 to 87, she was a coco girl, and she was also a communist. How can I get those two ideas into one word in English? Can I? The program on which she appeared was called Cocorico Boy. It was a French TV variety show hosted by Stéphane Coraro in the mid-1980s. The name plays on this national connotation of coco, and its resident dance troupe, the Coco Girls, was a group of women who were styled and marketed with the casual sexism that was typical of French TV at the time. So the word coco carries this double meaning in French in Marienske's text. And this is information that the reader needs, but that no single English word, or at least not one that I could think of, could carry both. This meant that whatever I chose, I was going to split those two meanings apart into two terms when the French was able to keep them together in one. So what did I do? Well, luckily I work with living authors, and I talked to Marienske to find out which of the two options was most important to her. The answer? Both. My solution? Comrade, Coco Girl. Comrade, I think, speaks for itself, given other details provided in the text about communism. And Coco Girl becomes evident in the description of the narrator's time working on the show. The final item that I wanted to talk about today isn't exactly about vocabulary, although it is linked to a single word. It's more about whether or not I had the right positionality to make certain translation decisions at all. Now, I do not subscribe to the idea that a translator has to be very similar in lived experience to an author in order to translate them, even if the text has autobiographical elements. This point, however, is important to this translation. The point of positionality, however, is important in this translation because Marienske is talking about her bisexuality while I am heterosexual. Let's get to the example. At one point, Marienske uses the term bro in English in a conversation among lesbians. Initially, I was unfamiliar with her degree of mastery of English and thought it might just be a misuse of the term, since it carries male markers, obviously. Later, I learned that Marienske is fully bilingual and knew exactly what she was doing. The point here is that in translating, like in so many things, assuming that someone made a mistake, for example, is not a great strategy. So again, I went to Marienske and I asked her directly. She explained the use of the term within her in-group, and of course, it remained bro in the translation. Again, let me be precise about what this example means and what it doesn't mean. I am not claiming that translators need lived experience to translate an author. I am not claiming that translators need to share lived experience with the authors they translate. Such a standard would make translation even more impossible than it is now. What it's about is realizing that writers use words in their own way, sometimes differently than the translator would use them themselves. It's also, again, about not making assumptions, although I will say making mistakes is inevitable, and it's about going to the person whose word it actually is, letting her tell you what it means and what it carries, rather than presuming you know what she's talking about. In short, it's about noticing the differences. So there you have 3 moments, 3 different kinds of problem. A citation, a single word jammed with meaning, and a question of who decides what a word means. What connects them for me here isn't a general theory of translation. What connects them is that in each case, the easy version, translate all the quotes, pick one meaning of coco, guess at the use of the word bro in context, would have been a faster process, and to me it would have been wrong. The harder version meant leaving something slightly inaccessible to an English reader and asking questions. Solving all these little puzzles is the best part of translation for me. Except when I don't find a solution that I love and I have to accept imperfection. But I suppose that can be a good lesson too. What about you? Do you read novels in translation? Do you prefer readability or the possibility of taking a little trip to the culture of the source text? Maybe a bit of each. In 2 weeks, I'll be talking about Chloé Delaume again and her autofiction in images, Corpus Simsi. for now. Thanks for watching. Please consider liking and subscribing. It does help the video get suggested to other users. And before you go, don't forget to keep watching for a bit of pastoral Norman countryside in a video that I filmed earlier this summer, long before the heat got quite so intense. Thanks again. À bientôt.